My name is Maureen O'Brien, and I'm from the Theology Department, and delighted to see so many here today. And I'll be emceeing, as it were, this luncheon. I'll be calling Lucy Jo up in a moment to say a few words about Founders Week. But as you're gathering, and as everybody's getting settled, we'd like to offer a blessing. Then Lucy Jo will come up to say a few words. Then I'll be coming up again to say a few words about Spiritan Friends luncheons, and we'll be launching into the program. So let us pray. God of love and light, you illuminate the darkness of our world and call us to bring forth our own lights into the dark corners where violence, hatred, and division threaten. Give us courage and strength to believe that by joining our gifts and energies, we may be sources of hope amid the many struggles. In this Founders Week, bless our gatherings as we draw animation from the example of all who seek to be guided by your Holy Spirit. Bless our time together today. Bless our speakers. Bless this food, those who have prepared it, our sharing of it, and our conversation over it. We make these prayers in your holy name. Amen. And Lucy Jo.
Welcome, everybody. Happy Founders Week. I was talking to Father Ray, and I think the last time we were able to have this many folks for a Founders Week luncheon was 2020, just before March of 2020, when everything shut down. So it is so nice to see so many people here coming to join us and to hear from Father John Fogarty and Debbie Kostosky today and celebrate the week. I just wanted to let folks know there are events all week. You're welcome. We have another luncheon tomorrow with Dr. Kathleen Roberts, who's going to be really, really wonderful. We have the reception on Thursday, Spiritan fundraiser tomorrow for the missions with a beer tasting. If that's your jam, that's a lot of fun. That's one of my favorites. And I know there's a couple of people here that have sold that hard in their department, so thank you very much for selling those tickets. And then Vespers, of course, closes the week on Friday. And then is a bonus event on February 9th. We have one of the final Spiritan anniversary events on campus as well. So all sorts of great stuff happening for the next couple of weeks. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. If anybody brought donations for the Red Door, I know that was on the list. You can put them up in the corner if you don't know what I'm talking about. We were collecting granola bars, fruit packs, single pack cookies, and single pack chips to donate to Red Door. The women's volleyball team is going to be getting together to make those into lunches to be delivered on Sunday. So without further ado, because I talked to about a half a dozen people that have a 1 o'clock meeting, I'm going to turn it back over to Maureen, I think, who's going to introduce Father Fogarty. Oh, there you are.
So once again, it's great to see you. This luncheon is serving a kind of double purpose in that it is obviously part of Founders Week, but it is also part of a program that has been going on with pandemic interruption, but started before the pandemic in 2019, called, the full title of it was Sharing Lunch and Our Spiritan Stories. For short, we call it the Spiritan Friends Luncheons. And so it is an initiative coming from the lay Spiritans in collaboration with the Spiritan U.S. Provincial Council. So the luncheons were conceived as a way to invite people, all of you, to more fully encounter and embrace the Spiritan charism or ethos, this sort of guiding impetus of what makes Spiritan, what makes the university a Spiritan place. And to do that through a kind of deepening understanding and experience of that charism, that ethos, as friends and collaborators of the Spiritan congregation. And so the luncheons are meant to be a kind of creative formation experience that engages through stories, engages us, our hopes, our dreams, our needs, and our questions with those of the Spiritans, of their stories, of their charism, as we seek to live in collaboration here on the bluff together. And so the way that we've been doing that, I'll say in a minute, through a particular kind of format that we'll also be using today. Now that you're here, now that you have been signed up and RSVP'd to this event, you will be part of the email list for future Spirit and Friends luncheons. If you hadn't been on that list already, now you are. So you'll receive information in the future about those gatherings, and there will certainly be another one coming up this semester. We don't have a date yet, but we'll let you know. And so the format is pretty much the same each time for these events. So what we do at the Spirit and Friends luncheons is we have a nice lunch, which we're happy to share today. And then we start with a Spiritan sharing a story that speaks in some way to the charism that Spiritan is committed to embodying. And then we have a Spiritan friend, someone who is a collaborator, somebody who also feels drawn to that charism as they have lived it at Duquesne, and speaking from their own experience at Duquesne. And then after listening to those two folks, we have a brief opportunity at our own tables for conversation to see what resonates with us from those stories, what resonates from our own experience at Duquesne and perhaps beyond about those themes of Spiritanness, if we want to say that. So, and then it wraps up because time goes quickly when we're sharing those kinds of stories. So that's how we'll proceed. I'll give the introductions, and then the two speakers will go one after the other, and then I'll invite us into conversation. When we get to that point of the table conversation, we'll just ask that somebody at the table, you can all be co-responsible, but if there's somebody at the table who just makes sure that everyone has introduced themselves, that you know everyone's names, and that everyone who wishes to has a chance to speak during that conversation, that would be most appreciated. So I do want to be sure to say thank you to Spiritan Campus Ministry and Father Bill Christie, Director of Spiritan Campus Ministry, for providing the lovely lunch today. Very big thanks to Lucy Jo DiMaggio for her tireless efforts in Founders Week, all the many wonderful events of Founders Week, including today, her planning team, everyone who has contributed to all of these events and to today's lunch. And also to Dr. Anne Marie Hansen for her tireless efforts on behalf of the lay Spiritans who have very much catalyzed initiatives like Spirit and Friends luncheons. So thanks to all. Okay, so I'm going to introduce both the speakers, and then they can just go one after the other as in turn. So Father John Fogarty probably needs no introduction for many of us. He's certainly not a stranger to Duquesne University. He is a Spiritan from Ireland. He has worked in Ghana, in Ireland, in the United States, and in Italy. He was at Duquesne previously as the director of the Center for Spiritan Studies, and back then he and I were sharing the same office suite. It was quite delightful when the Center for Spiritan Studies was just getting going. He has held major leadership positions, both nationally and internationally, for the Spiritan congregation. And most recently now he's back, I guess that was just last fall, right, that you returned, as the special advisor to the president and a member of the cabinet. So in a moment, he'll be speaking on the overall theme of Founders Week, sharing our light in the spirit of belonging. And then he will be followed by the respondent, and that is Ms. Debbie Kostosky, who also needs no introduction, I think, to many of us here at Duquesne. So Debbie, I don't know exactly the years on all this, but Debbie, that's on purpose, she says. So Debbie had, immediately after high school, she had gone to work in the local steel plant in customer service. But at that same time, she was very involved in church work, as a catechist, as a children's liturgy of the word leader, as a member of the church choir. And then when the steel plant closed, we were lucky enough that she came to Duquesne. And so Debbie came here as both an employee and as a student, and so she has subsequently earned both the Bachelor of Arts in Theology and Sociology, as well as a Master of Arts in Theology with a concentration in liturgy. And she has certifications both from the diocese and nationally as a catechist, as a campus minister, as a director of liturgy. She is on our campus ministry, Spiritan campus ministry staff. You have seen her behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, probably in many campus ministry events. I know one of her jobs, because I see her doing it a lot, is chapel coordinator. And I'm sure that that is a job that brings joys as well as many challenges along the way, weddings, etc. But she has many responsibilities in campus ministry. And when she has a few spare moments, she likes to knit. So thank you to both of you, and we will ask Father John to come forward as our Spiritan storyteller. Father John.
So thank you, Maureen, and thank you all for coming. As you heard, I was asked to tell a story, and Irish people, I think, are good at telling stories. So, but connected to the theme, which is sharing our light in a spirit of belonging. So I thought I would simply tell my own story of how I found a sense of belonging in the Spiritan family, but also how I found a sense of belonging to a worldwide community through the Spiritan family. So the first photograph, it's just about six or seven pictures. This is a very special picture because it was taken about 1921. It's my grandparents, and my father is the smallest one standing up with a little sailor outfit. It's in rural Ireland around 1921 because my dad was born in 1918. But my interest in both the missionary life and in the religious life actually goes back to that house. It had, right up to the 1960s, no running water, no electricity. But I went there for my annual vacation as a schoolboy. And my grandmother in particular, my granddad had died by that stage. I actually slept in the same room as my grandmother because it was a very small house. And I have two very vivid memories. The first one is what's known as an American trunk. I think you know. An American trunk. She had one in her room, very little furniture. But inside, in that trunk, every year she had the back issues of a missionary magazine called The Far East, which was produced by the Columbans, the Society of St. Columban. So I absolutely loved going to that trunk. She never stopped me. And to take out these magazines and pore over the stories and the pictures of the missionaries, young missionaries heading for the Far East. The second vivid memory I have from my grandmother, which also impressed me very deeply at the time, was as she lay in bed before she went to sleep, she started praying. But she did it talking to God in her own language, just sharing the story of the day. It was amazing for me, listening to her just talking to God as if he were there with her. Of course he was, but she had that deep sense of the presence of God in her everyday life, a God with whom she could share her concerns and her joys. So, the next picture is my school. It's a poor picture. I took it from the internet. So anyway, but really, this is my high school. But during high school, I really was very interested in finding a missionary congregation where I would fit in. So we had at the time many vocation directors who used to speak to the final year students encouraging them to join. That practice is long since gone, but we had several different congregations who came in, and diocesan priests. And you usually got a piece of paper and they asked you, if you're interested to know more, please tick the yes box. So I ticked the yes for all the missionary congregations, but I didn't know where I could belong. And the Columbians didn't come for some reason, but I wrote to the Columbians. I told this story here in terms of recruitment to the VP for recruitment, and I said, I just didn't like the tone of the letter I got back. It's strange. I couldn't say why exactly. But anyway, I didn't feel that's where I belonged. So along came the Spiritans, whom I didn't know anything about, other than that a very famous President of Ireland was associated with them, Eamon de Valera and so on. But I signed yes, and I was brought in for a come and see. And I can remember as clearly as if it were yesterday, this is true, the moment I said, this is where I belong. And it was a very simple thing, really. The director had me in his room, and he picked out what was then the new rules and constitutions after Vatican II, and he started reading. And this is what he read. They were known, the Congregation of the Holy Ghost, as was at that stage, is a missionary institute whose general aim is to preach the gospel among people and groups who have not heard or who have only scarcely heard the gospel message. And he went on to say, its specific end is missionary activity among peoples and groups whose material and spiritual needs are greatest and who are the most neglected, a service for which the church has difficulty in finding workers. And I remember saying, that's where I want to be. That's where I belong. And I went to my parish priest for a recommendation. It was necessary. He said, who are you joining? I said, the Holy Ghost Fathers. And he said, I'm glad you're going there. They're a very human group. So as I moved through the formation process, I learned more about the history and the spirituality of the congregation, and I began to feel more and more at home and happy I made the decision I did. I was particularly attracted, I think, by the spirituality of Francis Liberman, who stressed, like my grandmother, finding God in the ordinary events of everyday life, sometimes in darkness and sickness, but also in joy. And about accepting yourself and your own limitations, we'd say, not beating yourself up too much, but accepting yourself, giving the best you have and leaving the rest to God. This was quite simple, really. But I found he had his own battles with illness and family issues and so on. So I found this, I found myself at home in that kind of a spirituality. I was fortunate enough to be sent to West Africa, to Guiana, for my pastoral experience, 2 years, 76 to 78. But it opened up a whole new world for me. Again, you never know whether you're going to fit in when you go into a completely new situation, culture and people. But somehow I left there with a sense of having been privileged to meet a very cultured people with a deep sense of the presence of God in everyday life, with a very strong sense of community and joy. And I felt I had discovered a second home. So I came back anyway, but yes, one other insight I had in Ghana was that the single most important quality in a person is not necessarily their ability to give great homilies or to leave fine constructions behind, but it's about your ability to establish personal relations with people. And those who were here for the Martin Luther King event, that was when the speaker was asked that's exactly what he said. If you want to change things, it's through personal relationships. And I was convinced of that when I left Ghana. So I just want to finish with how that opened a wider world to me. I was maybe unfortunate in that I found myself not directly, for the most part, in mission work, as it were, but I found myself mostly in administrative and leadership positions in the congregation here in North America, in Ireland, in Rome, and so on. But the different roles I had enabled me to travel extensively, which I think was a wonderful gift, to visit the different countries where Spiritans work. I think it's 61 now at the moment, plus 4 French departments as well. But I visited virtually every one of them, some of them a number of times. And I had the ticket in my hand for the last 2, Madagascar and Congo, Kinshasa, when COVID came, and I never made it. So, but I think these visits gave me a sense of really belonging to a much wider community, an ability, to sense being at home in very, very diverse situations. Just very briefly, I have three of those. When we have the good fortune that when we go to a country, we don't go as a tourist visiting. A tourist sees the world through the window of a hotel or the window of a bus, perhaps. But we have the wonderful privilege of direct contact and access to people and communities. The first one for me was the cook in Simah, the cook in Rahimir Khan in Pakistan. I did everything wrong when I went in. I shook hands with her, which I was so, you never do that to a Muslim woman, But anyway, despite the barriers of language and culture, I actually developed a very strong friendship with her, to the extent that much later she sent me a card. She couldn't read or write, but she was able to painstakingly put her signature. They told me she went 3 times to town looking for that card. And I went back 20 years later, and she brought me to her home, and I met her family, and so on. The second one is Papua New Guinea, a very different world. That's a photograph of, and I have a very vivid memory of the day. I spent a morning actually with people with different disabilities. It's just people with whom one of our Spiritan brothers was working. And again, I had the sense of being in familiar surroundings, totally accepted and totally at home. And I'll always remember a young blind lady sitting beside me who started to speak with me. And she said, whatever you do, don't take this Spiritan brother away from us, because if you do, we will be lost. I remember her saying that. And the third experience, which I will carry with me forever, was the privilege of visiting and spending an overnight in a remote Amerindian village on the Moroni River, miles from anywhere. I think we were an hour and a half on a speedboat to get there, an island in French Guiana. It's basically the Amazon region, really. So when I arrived, I was met and greeted immediately by the local chief, who, to my great surprise, said, "Would you like a cold beer?" And I see, how can you? I'd say, there's no electricity, there's no store. For miles, I said, we just go across the river to Suriname, and we have a little generator here when people like you come. But we spent the whole evening, the community, around a very large table, sharing a meal and chatting late into the night. The meal, by the way, was monkey, but we were offered an alternative of fish from the river. So, but for me, they were sacred moments, a sense of really belonging. And I looked up the word belonging in the dictionary to see what equivalents there are. It says belonging connotes acceptance, inclusion, fitting in, fellowship, integration. I think maybe the best expression is feeling at home. So I'll leave you with a quote, which I think is from Pope Gregory, but it's one of the most wonderful expressions of what mission is about that I've ever come across. We go on mission to find brothers and sisters whom we have not known, so that we can live together with them as brothers and sisters. Thank you. Please. Debbie, you're on. So, I'll let you do that yourself. Thanks.
Yes, pull the microphone down. Hello, everyone. I hope you all had a nice lunch. So when Father John and I sat together to talk about our reflections for today, he told me that he was going to talk about community and belonging, and that he was going to mention his grandmother, which he did. So that immediately made me think of my grandfather, Stanley Walter Babola, who taught me that one of the key elements to forming any type of community is hospitality. And my grandfather knew hospitality. He was a minister of hospitality at his church long before that ministry was given its name. He stood in the foyer of his church and he greeted people, and he didn't just welcome them, he chatted with them. He found people seats, he showed people where the restrooms were. He helped with coats and umbrellas and baby carriers. He was there, as he put it, to help where help is needed. But he wasn't just this way at church. You could not walk anywhere with my grandfather without somebody knowing him and stopping him and having to talk to him. Then in 1998, there's the year, Maureen, when I came here to Duquesne and met the Spiritans, I realized that as good as my grandfather was at hospitality, even he could not compare to the Spiritans. The Spiritans practice what is often referred to as full contact hospitality, where scores are kept and prizes are awarded. What I have come to learn from the Spiritans these past 25 years is that there are basically 4 components to hospitality that help build community, and I would like to share my understanding with them to you today. This story has 4 points, because I have yet to master the 3-point art of rhetoric that Father John Sawicki does so eloquently. And as a disclaimer, if this sounds like an outline for a lesson plan, just understand that the core of my being will always be that 2nd grade catechist where my ministry first began. But no worries, I don't have a whiteboard, you do not have to take notes, and we will not be having a quiz afterwards. So point number 1, welcome everyone you meet. And I think the best thing to do is literally to greet everyone you see. That's an easy thing to do if you're wired as a grade A extrovert. It's harder if you're an introvert, and right now any introverts in this room are saying, can we just get on to point number 2? But often, the best things to do are the hardest things to do. So pray for grace, ask for strength, and, well, greet people. If speaking to people is too difficult at first, you can always wave to people. I wave to people all the time when I walk around this campus. Point number 2, engage people. Someone I know, who wears a big hat, likes to say that human beings are made up of carbon, water, and stories. So care about and take an interest in the people that you come across and share your story. I don't think this is overly difficult. And while there are some who would say that this is obvious, so often we do hold back from doing it. How many times have you been in an elevator with someone and neither of you say a word? If I'm in an elevator with another person, I have to say something. It could just be small talk. The weather is always a good conversation starter. Some people don't answer, but actually, most people do. Just remember that you will never meet someone who is not made in the image and likeness of God, and that Jesus was all about stories. Number 3, see, if I were John Sawicki, I would be done by now. Make dinner a priority. Now, this point comes from both the Spiritans and my mother. My mother was warmly known among my friends as the feeder. No one walked into my house without my mother saying to them, "Are you hungry? Did you eat? Can I fix you a plate?" There are people on this campus, there are people in this room whom my mother fed. And I, like my mother, am a feeder. Most people who know me know that it is truly a great joy for me to feed our students every Sunday after the 6 p.m. Mass for what we call Sunday supper. And this is also why I probably like the sign that hangs in the Laval kitchen that says, "We do not have a food museum." Over and over again, the Bible talks about the holiness of eating together, a meal with good food, good friends, good conversation. That's a good dinner, and it truly is holy. But this is about more than dinner with family or friends. Yes, eat with your relatives or your church prayer circle or your bowling league or your knitting group. Invite over your good friends, but remember that hospitality is also to give loving welcome to those outside your normal circle. It means sitting at table on campus with people whom you do not know yet. It is opening your life or your home to those who are not in your circle and welcoming them. And point number 4, the last one, love the outsider. In every work environment, every neighborhood, there are people who, for whatever reason, are outliers, those on the margins. These people are all around us, perhaps more than ever in our globalized world. We do have a tendency to shy away from differences and from being around people who think differently or act differently than we do. But I want to remind all of us of this. Jesus would have moved towards these people. We often read in the Bible about people making comments unkindly about who Jesus ate with. I once actually wrote a paper titled Jesus and His Dining Habits. Full disclosure, it got an A. Because Jesus, with his unique personality, was known for extending radical hospitality to people. He greeted people. He engaged people with stories. He ate with people, especially outliers. And as I have come to learn and to love, so do the Spiritans. So if we truly want to build a community of belonging, then we must go and do likewise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father John and Debbie. They certainly brought the spirit of story and of vividness of encounter and love and openness and the spirit and charism very much to the fore. So now it's our turn. So we are at tables, maybe with people we know, maybe with people we don't know, or some mix of both. And we've been given some marching orders by Debbie, too, which will help us, I think. We have some time together. And what I would say is let's make sure as you launch into some conversation first that you do know everyone at least by name before going any further. In the spirit of what Debbie was bringing forward, I might ask you if you introduce yourselves, you might also disclose to the group whether you think you're an extrovert or an introvert. That might be a way to get things going. And then simply spend time together sharing on just a broad question. How do these stories resonate for you in terms of your own experience at Duquesne? How do they speak to what you have seen, what you have heard, what you have encountered, what you have done, and here on the Bluff as part of this Spiritan University? And so, again, make sure that everyone has a chance to be heard. Feel free to ask one another questions and to enjoy one another's sharing on these topics. So now's your time. Have fun. Well, looking around at the faces and watching the animated conversation, it looks like it's been some rich sharing. Please feel free to stay and continue. But for those who have to get back to the offices, let us take a moment and one more time, let us say thank you to all who made this luncheon possible, but most especially to Father John Fogarty and to Ms. Debbie Kostosky. Thank you. For sparking such rich conversation. So again, stay tuned for future Spirit and Friends luncheons, and we'll hope to see you again. And if you have feedback about this kind of event, please feel free to let any of the planning team know, Lucy Jo, Debbie herself, myself, Anne Marie Hansen. We're always happy to hear how people experience these kinds of events. Thank you and enjoy your day. Bye-bye.